so that's where the power herb comes in. We'll be able to let it attack immediately exactly one time throughout the game.
I like looking at these teams as well, this head-to-head, because Ryan, with this Kyogre, of course, when you're looking at the restricted, wanting to be able to do all of this damage, you want to have the weather on your side for that.
Yeah.
Whereas Brandon has ways to counteract this weather with the Torkoal, but this Torkoal is also something that could be a heavy hitter in the Trick Room. You also have Pokemon that are also very okay to not have the weather. You don't need the sun for your own Pokemon to work, whereas for Ryan, if you find yourself in the sunny sphere, you find yourself taking a vacay out of Vancouver, well, this Kyogre is going to start to kind of flail and not do so well. As well, when you're looking at the moves of choice, I know Rose was talking earlier, oh, well, how much this water spout can do all of this damage, etc. with this Kyogre. But Ryan, instead foregoing it, more going for this Calm Mind setup-oriented route with leftovers.
It's really cool. It's almost a very similar composition in teams to something like a Calyrex Shadow Rider that has Nasty Plot or Calm Mind. Pokemon you'd frequently see with that are Incineroar, our Rillaboom, our Amoonguss, all very good at enabling their partners to set up and then take control of games. But instead it is this Kyogre with the leftovers, with the Terra Grass, a very defensive setup. Between the leftovers and the Grassy Surge, it will recover a lot of HP every turn. And you got the drum beating on Rillaboom as well, a really cool damage option that will lower speed. It's another means of speed control on top of the Tailwind Roaring Moon.
I like that you have that alternative mode built in with a Pokemon that you already want to be bringing to have that Grassy Terrain recovery, as you called out. You're not reliant on needing to bring a Roaring Moon, a Pokemon that doesn't appreciate, well, these Miraidon Draco Meteors, doesn't really at all these Flutter Mains. You're able to have these alternative routes. So I really, really do kind of like that. I'm curious then too, with the fact that you're looking for this longevity for this Kyogre in a lot of these points, paired up with this Rillaboom, how this will fare up going against the opposing end, because I feel like there's a couple of different ways when you're looking at Lunala that it can go. Some a little bit more looking at this bulky end, and then some that are a little bit more built for aggression. So I like kind of this switch up here, because as we get into Brandon's team, you'll see that this one seems to be a little bit more aggressive.
It is pretty aggressive and also has some annoying ways to disrupt Ryan's team. The Ogerpon Wellspring Mask is not something we see too much of in this regulation, despite it being very popular early on in the Scarlet and Violet metagame. But that Water Absorb ability will be very useful in trying to swap into that Kyogre. Doesn't matter what you're typing, as if you've got Water Absorb and actually heal off of those Origin Pulses instead of take damage. On top of that, we have the Lunala and DD combination that is very aggressive, like you mentioned, Sierra. Expanding Force and Psychic Drain is very strong. Very scary, especially backed up by a Meteor Beam boost. And on top of all that, you've got the Guts Ursaluna, which the combination with the Flame Orb and the Facade with the Guts ability can hit for huge amounts of damage.
And the fact that you have a couple of Pokemon on this team that are going to be a little bit speedier, you have this Choice Scarf Single Striker Shifu that can do a lot of damage. Stellar Terastallization as well to make sure what you lock into is going to be doing the utmost damage. But then you also have 4 Pokemon that would really benefit from this Trick Room. And if Ryan is looking at, well, Pokemon that are looking to outspeed, you can go ahead. You have 2 different options to set this up and then to try and go crazy.
Roaring Moon on Ryan's side, I think, is going to be really cool here. It does really well into Lunala. Oftentimes, Lunala can run Moonblast for some coverage, but this one we see is not packing Moonblast. It's got Expanding Force, Moongeist Beam, and Meteor Beam as its attack, so Roaring Moon does pretty well into that. If you're able to knock off the Flame Orb from the Ursaluna before the Flame Orb activates, you're not going to have the Guts ability for the entire game, which is really, really good. The speed boosting, presumably speed boosting, booster energy photosynthesis will allow you to outspeed the Urshifu and hit it with an Acrobatics if you really want to. So I think this Roaring Moon could be a huge piece for Ryan in this match.
It's time to head into the very first game. Indeedy, Lunala for Brandon, Kyogre, and Roaring Moon. So you called out that this Roaring Moon pair up pretty good against a couple of these Pokemon, and we'll see it from Rip.
And right off the bat here, I love that Ryan puts his foot on the gas. So you have the Roaring Moon immediately threatening big damage with knockoff. Thanks to Shadow Shield, the Lunala should be able to take 1 knockoff, but if it does have to eat the knockoff, it'll lose its Power Herb, which, much like the Ursaluna, it's like a really big piece of damage there, because if you don't have the Power Herb and you try to go for Meteor Beam, you're stuck with that 1 charge turn, which is a big deal.
Looking at these two, this Kyogre, if there is not going to be this weather that's kind of setting up, you can definitely go for a bit of damage. Or if you do think that there is maybe that potential to set up this Ice Beam, there's a couple Pokemon that maybe wouldn't appreciate that. No switches though. Indeedy, follow me. Make sure it is the center of attention, and center it is. Knockoff is a lot of damage into the little helper friend, and Rocky Helmet gone. Looking at a follow-up move though, that would be what's important, but Lunala here is going to be the first to act. Meteor Beam, and of course with that Power Herb, you're going to be able to use this right away. Special attack raise, the damage that it's going to do into this Roaring Moon, not nearly as much as maybe I would have thought if you're kind of have that special attack in your boost. You're relying on this for your restricted. Calm Mind for the Kyogre, so now you have a special attack and a special defense raise, and well, Lunala is not going to do, I guess, as much as it would want to that either. And
especially now that the, Indeedee has taken so much damage, if you are targeting it with one more attack, it should be knocked out, which would leave Lunala on its own. Thankfully for Brandon, he has a way to prevent Lunala's Shadow Shield from being taken out by the Roaring Moon, thanks to the Follow Me. Because if you do, for example, have to take a knockoff and then an Origin Pulse without Shadow Shield, you're taking a lot of damage on that Lunala.
The Roaring Moon just swapping out, though. Instead, Incineroar hits the field. So you're not looking at an attack into that Indeedee. You do have a spread damage move, though, that can deal with the Indeedee and then try and hit into that Lunala for that Shadow Shield. Indeedee, though, also just swapping Ogerpon. You had called out that Water Absorb into, well, this Ogerpon we don't actually, frankly, get to see as much anymore.
You really don't, and it's going to come in handy here. It's one of the few things on Brandon's team that can pretty safely swap into this Kyogre with the +1 Origin Pulse. Terra Grass here, a great move from Lunala as well. Thanks to that Terastallization, we'll take much, much less damage from an incoming Origin Pulse.
Moongeist Beam now into Incineroar. Not very effective, but being able to help it a little bit with that +1 Origin Pulse, that Water Absorb, no affecting that Ogerpon on the opposing end. And the Lunala going to take that hit quite well.
Quite well, but now that Shadow Shield's down, I do believe 2 more Origin Pulses should do the trick. And even though Ogerpon is, of course not taking damage from Origin Pulses, you don't really mind activating that Water Absorb because it hasn't taken any damage anyway. If you're, chipping it down and then you have to Origin Pulse it to heal it, then you're kind of losing a lot of ground. But you're like losing nothing by going for Origin Pulse here because you're damaging that Lunala while at the same time kind of ignoring that Water Absorb in the first place.
Incineroar just there to make appearances, but switches out instantly Rillaboom to hit the field. So a way that maybe if you want to have Big out on the next turn, you can see something there. But Terastallization, we've already gotten to see what it is from Brandon's end, and we saw the lock-in from Ryan. Kyogre into that Grass type. Make sure that you're not going to get hit with something like a Horn Leech from the Ogerpon onto the opposing end. As Ivy Cudgel instead into the opposing slot, trying to catch that Incineroar there, but not too much into that Rillaboom. We'll have to see if the follow-up will be the damage that's needed. Into the Rillaboom, yeah, that will claim the KO there.
That's a really big KO too. That's a really smart double up because if Incineroar does stay in, we'll get knocked out by Ivy Cudgel, and then the, just barely, Moongeist Beam would have knocked out, hit the Kyogre instead. But covering for that swap, especially with the Rain Boost, that is enough damage to take out Rillaboom, and now Brandon can control the terrain for the rest of the game. You can make sure Psychic Terrain gets up, no more fake outs are possible, and you can make sure that Expanding Force is now hitting 2 targets. Roaring Moon comes back in, it does not have that Photosynthesis boost anymore, as the booster energy was consumed when it was led on the first turn of the game. But that Ice Beam is really big. Calling that this Ogerpon is not going to go for Follow Me. You put Lunala in range for 1 more Origin Pulse, for something like Knockoff or Acrobatics. Now that Roaring Moon should still be the fastest thing on the field, even without that booster energy. You can go straight for a Trick Room, or sorry, not a Trick Room, a Tailwind, because there's no way that Brandon can get Trick Room up this turn unless he, not to jinx it, miss an Origin Pulse.
You're going to try and jinx it, aren't you? Okay,
no, on purpose, I promise.
Protect from Roaring Moon. So no hit into that, as Ivy Cudgel just going to attempt to go into that slot anyways. Now, to see what the Lunala wants to go for. Moongeist Beam yet again. There is the special defense raise over onto this Kyogre, so not even going to do half damage as Origin Pulse. This is going to be the first one for the Water Absorb, but the second, there we are. It is going to connect, so Lunala gets taken down.
Ryan evens the Pokemon count and takes out Brandon's +1 special attack Lunala. Could be very important here. The Indeedee on Brandon's side already been pretty heavily weakened by a knockoff, and now that the Indeedee, can't survive an Origin Pulse to possibly set up Trick Room, I like the protect from the Roaring Moon here just to make sure that you're getting Tailwind up as late as possible, because if, Roaring Moon sets up the Tailwind and then immediately gets knocked out, you will still have the maximum 3 turns left. Urshifu comes in though, unfortunately, because that booster energy was used up. This Choice Scarf Urshifu should act before the Roaring Moon and might even be able to take out this Kyogre with a big Wicked Blow, even a Poison Jab, or just knock out the Roaring Moon before it can Tailwind.
I'm curious with the Urshifu what it's going to lock into, because with it being the Choice Scarf, once you're locked, that is it for potentially the rest of the match. You do have the Indeedee in the back, but got to be aware of that, because if you're already looking at, okay, well, I want to swap the Indeedee in, there's going to be that Wicked Blow into the Kyogre. That's not going to be enough there, as Tailwind from Roaring Moon, instead trying to take care of the threat, means you're now losing that speed that you had. Origin Pulse, we already know how that goes the Ogerpon, but it will connect. Urshifu, gone.
Urshifu is knocked out in one hit by that Origin Pulse, and thanks to Tailwind going up, Kyogre is able to act before this Ogerpon, which will finish it off with an IV Cudgel here, but Ryan, I think, is still in a very, very strong position. He's got the Incineroar in the back, can intimidate this physical attacking Ogerpon. I think Rain runs out very soon, if not right now. There it is, and so the IV Cudgels will no longer be boosted, and Indeedee, again, is at very low HP. One attack from either of these two Pokemon probably able to knock it out, especially given Roaring Moon's Dragon typing, in a pretty strong spot here to try and finish off the game with Acrobatics.
See how much damage it's going to do after this Intimidate or potential of these critical hits. Incineroar hitting the field at the same time as this Indeedee, we are going to be able to get that Psychic Surge back up. So you're not going to have the option to try and slow one of these things down. So yeah, even if things are faster on one end, I'd be looking at that damage output. The Indeedee does have one Follow Me to work with.
One Follow Me, but no Protect, so if it does try to go for something like a Dazzling Gleam to maybe finish off Roaring Moon, it won't be able to. But Helping Hand coming through instead, I really like this play.
Try and make sure any of that damage that you're losing with that dropped attack can be made up in other ways. First attack into the Indeedee. If it was already targeting that way, then yeah, you don't need to Follow Me. It was already the center of attention. The follow-up's going to be what's important. The IV Cudgel, you need the damage there, and into the Incineroar, you are going to get it. The critical hit as well, and we are down to a 1v1 situation.
Interesting here, the Spiky Shield being the protecting move of choice on Ogerpon means that if Roaring Moon does opt to go for Acrobatics, and Ogerpon does go for Spiky Shield, it's going to take a little bit of chip damage, so Ryan might have to be a little bit careful. If you don't one-hit KO this Ogerpon with Acrobatics, the Spiky Shield damage on top of the IV Cudgel may be enough to return the favor.
Roaring Moon, that's the protect. For the opposing end, Ogerpon, Spiky Shield, so won't do anything in that time around.
The protect, I think what Ryan was trying to do there is get the Spiky Shield out of Ogerpon on Brandon's side of the field to maybe make sure you're not going for Acrobatics. The issue with trying to do that with your own protect is that you're going to act first, and then Spiky Shield can't fail this turn because it failed on the prior turn. It is guaranteed to go off here. So now you're taking this Acrobatics chip damage, and I like what Ryan was trying to do there, but a little bit of a misplay with the protect itself.
When you got the speed on your side and other situations, you don't anymore. The Tailwind gone, but one of those things, and when you already were so low on damage, we'll have to see you can do enough. But yeah, the boost energy was gone, so do you have the speed here?
I think we saw it was still faster. Okay. Yeah.
All right, yeah, but not enough. So Ogerpon will survive past that hit. IV Cudgel, how much is this going to do? It actually isn't enough. Not very effective. This is about to get to be a not very fun little game here, because if you hit into the Spiky Shield, you're cooked.
Does Ryan call it? Does Brandon call it? Like, do we think Ryan tries to go for, a Tailwind to dodge the Spiky Shield? You can attack your partner slot, so you're not attacking the other side of the field and being forced to take damage from the Spiky Shield. Protect comes through. It's the same issue though here. If Spiky Shield would have came through, it would have been live on the following turn again. IV Cudgel instead though, Brandon was just going straight for the attack, trying to predict Ryan outspreading him here. And it just comes down to, if Ogerpon Spiky Shields and Roaring Moon attacks into it, then Brandon will win the game. But if Ryan is able to dodge a Spiky Shield, it will be enough for the knockout.
But if Ryan goes for Tailwind, thinking that you are going to get well, the spiky
There it
shield on the
is.
other end, then
Yeah.
that would also be disastrous if Brandon goes for the attack. So
Right.
spiky shield, but the setup of the tailwind. The next turn, again, if Brandon goes for the double spiky shield and hits it,
Yep.
it's game done for Ryan. So does he?
No.
He does not. The 1 and 3 not in favor. So now this Roaring Moon will be able to attack. Ogerpon goes down, and Ryan LOSETO up 1 in the set.
Really, really tricky end game, but well played by Ryan to make sure he's not taking damage from that spiky shield more than he needed to, and able to finish off the game with the acrobatics from that Roaring Moon. The early part of that game was really interesting because we saw Brandon go straight for the Meteor Beam, and as soon as the Meteor Beam was used up, the Incineroar became very, very safe. You know, the Lunala only has Moongeist Beam and Expanding Force, one of which does 0 damage and one of which does almost 0 damage, because Meteor Beam, again, is a 2-turn move without that power herb.
That was such a close match, though. I'm still curious with this Lunala. With the Lunala, after getting that Meteor Beam and that Power Herb, some of the damage was still just kind of a little bit, and then all of a sudden you had that terrestrialization to make sure you weren't taking too much from these Origin Pulses, which then leaves you open to just getting Ice Beam. The Kyogre as well, when you are looking after getting that Calm Mind boost, the damage output it was doing was quite respectable, and even though it couldn't hit into that Ogerpon on the opposing end with those Origin Pulses, well, that didn't really matter for too much of the match.
Yeah.
The Ogerpon didn't really target into it for a bit because I had to deal with the partner Pokemon, and then Kyogre was still able to just go through the rest of Brandon's team.
One thing I think Ryan did very well was not damage that Ogerpon until he knew that he didn't need to like Origin Pulse for damage. You know, again, if you are like chipping away this Ogerpon, which can be trained to be pretty bulky, especially when it's kind of the defensive backbone follow me Pokemon on this team, and then you have to go for Origin Pulses to do any water type damage with the Rain, with the Calm Mind boost. It's all for naught unless you are able to, you know, make use of that Water Absorb to kind of ignore that slot. If you are going for the Terra Grass on the Kyogre, then you're not taking much damage from the Ogerpon Wellspring at all, so it can be kind of a dead slot, which is a weird thing to say about a Pokemon with Water Absorb sitting in front of Kyogre.
Just a little bit, but I'm curious then going into game 2 if we get to see a little bit of different strategy. Lead will be, at least on Brandon's end, as right away that Ogerpon is making an appearance next to that Lunala. So a way to maybe pressure into the Kyogre on the opposing end a little bit sooner.
I think I like this mix-up from Brandon because the Lunala Indeedee lead is so heavily threatened by this Roaring Moon. Now you have the Ogerpon, which, if Roaring Moon does opt for a Terrestrialization, probably gets knocked out in one hit by Acrobatics. But if you're going for the Flying Terra Roaring Moon, you're not using a Terrestrialization on Kyogre, which could be a big deal down the line.
A double protect just on Ryan's end. Terrestrialization on the other. It was the Lunala in that first game into that Terra Grass, and it will be yet again. But Ryan with the double protect, I like this opportunity to scout out what's happening on the other end as well. If it is a run back of that first game, going for that Meteor Beam, that is a way that, well, you can't use it again because you're going to be wasting that Power Herb right here, right now. So we see that protect finally come through. Horn Leech from the Ogerpon. Make sure the Kyogre, you know, keep it honest. Make sure that if it's not Terrestrializing, it'll get punished. But Lunala here going for that Trick Room. So Brandon was at a speed disadvantage in that first game with a lot of the Pokemon, and now, well, going for the speed in his favor.
I like that a lot, especially if he was able to catch Ryan going straight for a Tailwind, but even so, not going for the Meteor Beam right away. Like you said, Sarah, it makes sure that you get to use Meteor Beam not only to boost your special attack by 1, but to get a huge amount of damage off at the same time. Ryan will return the Terrestrialization favor here with the Kyogre. Another double grass restricted Pokemon Terrestrialization game. Makes a lot of sense, of course, into that Ogerpon Wellspring. But now with Kyogre will be attacking before the Lunala, which could come in handy here with this Calm Mind.
Yeah, there's some Pokemon on Ryan's end that definitely appreciate the faster modes, but Kyogre is not one of them, at least in this moment. So +1 to the special attack, special defenses, Meteor Beam. Of course, you're gonna get the mile-long animation. We get that special attack raise. Oh, we get to see the Power Herb get activated. We got the checklist, and it will be a connect into the Roaring Moon. We saw how much damage it did last time, so that is going to be no surprise. Ivy do a follow-up in the rain. That will finish it off.
Really big double KO there. I think that Roaring Moon was I didn't see what it locked into, but either way, if it goes for a knockoff or acrobatics into either of those slots, that's some big chip damage, especially if it went for that Lunala to break the Shadow Shield. Rillaboom does come in instead. Wasn't able to override the Psychic Terrain as Indeedee hasn't hit the field just yet. So if Brandon does have the Indeedee in back, this actually a pretty good spot for this Lunala to be in, because you can start firing off those Psychic Terrain boosted expanding forces. But Rillaboom here, another strong answer. You got two grass types into an Ogerpon Wellspring, which is pretty favorable. And of course, you have the option for some disruption with Fake Out and repositioning with U-Turn.
The Fake Out, I think I'd be a little scared of if you know the possibility of the Indeedee here. So maybe just going for the damage. The fact that you have the Terastallization out of that Lunala and can double into it, you do have that U-turn for that super effective hit. But I'm curious with this Lunala, when we do get the Expanding Force, exactly how much that's going to be doing. If we do see this Indeedee swap in the Psychic Terrain and going that way, but no swap. Instead, that's going to be Ice Beam first off, brings it down into about half-ish. His Moongeist Beam not wanting to go for the Expanding Force without that terrain, and Kyogre's going to eat that hit quite well. U-turn, follow-up, super effective, brought down quite low into the yellow.
Now Rillaboom swaps out. We will get to see Ryan's final Pokemon of this second game, and it is the Incineroar. Nice swap here, unless Ivy Cudgel comes into that slot.
Yeah.
But, you know, Incineroar into two grass types, getting an Intimidate onto this physical attacker. Ogerpon Wellspring with Trick Room being up as well. Pretty nice spot, but Ivy Cudgel is the move of choice.
I mean, looking at the moves, it is the Incineroar will survive after the Intimidate, so that's nice. But looking at the moves that this Ogerpon has, I feel like you're better going off for this Ivy Cudgel and see if you can get that swap in, because it's not like the Horn Leech was going to do the most damage to either of those Grass-type Pokemon anyway. So being able to get a lot of damage down, and even if the Lunala's taken a lot of damage, this Ogerpon's done a really good job in kind of whittling away at the Pokemon. And that could be all that difference maker, especially since we haven't gotten an opportunity to see the last two Pokemon that Brandon has. We're still on lead, but that will get to change with this next turn. Lunala is out, and Ursaluna comes out.
Ursaluna wants to switch in here and try and catch something. Actually, I don't really know what the goal is here, because if Origin Pulse comes through, Ursaluna just gets knocked out. We see the Parting Shot go into the spiky shield of the Ogerpon and will be ineffective. And now Kyogre has the chance to attack. It's going to be the Ice Beam into this Ursaluna with the +1 boost, able to do a lot of damage, but barely miss the KO. But the freeze! Oh no, you can't get frozen. You can't get burned by the Flame Orb if you're already frozen.
And things just go from bad to worse. You're not, even if you, first off, there is the opportunity to just not thaw on this next turn. So that isn't great whatsoever. And then if you do, you're not getting that damage output that you really want to and well, frankly need to with this Ursaluna, especially when it's going to be one of these final turns to Trick Room, and you would have needed to capitalize off of that. So that is not what you want to be seeing at all in that spot.
I wonder why the Ursaluna swapped there anyway. You know, there's probably either an Ice Beam or Origin Pulse hitting that slot. Maybe Brandon just wants to buy some time, let the Trick Room expire, and was willing to give up the Ursaluna. Instead, this is probably worst case, right? If it swaps in and survives the Ice Beam, at least you get the Flame Orb going. You get to attack at full power on the next turn. But instead, it is frozen by Ice Beam and spends this next turn frozen as well.
Parting Shot already. This Ogerpon was at -1 attack, now at -2, and Rillaboom can hit the field once again for that next turn. I mean, maybe with the Lunala, you had set the Trick Room, but then the Lunala was faster. You'd gotten rid of the Roaring Moon. Maybe you want to preserve it for once the situation is done. You can then be one of the speedier options out there again. Ogerpon. Oh no! Both of Brandon's Pokemon are frozen. You have got to be kidding me.
That's wild. Ryan really wants to lock this match up in 2 games here, and his Kyogre agrees. That's a really fortunate swing for Ryan there. Ogerpon, it wouldn't have done too much damage there, right? It's at -2 now. It's firing into 2 grass types, both of which will resist either attack it could have gone for, but it never feels good to have your Pokemon frozen, especially if they fail to thaw, like on this turn. Ursaluna needs like 2 turns to be attacking at full power, because if it thaws this turn, if it even survives the turn, it won't have the Guts boost until the turn after. And so now this is a really great spot for Ryan. You kind of get 2 free attacks here.
I'll say something. There is always a memorable stream game when Brandon's on the broadcast, that's for sure. Double freeze, nothing from Ogerpon. Drum beating's not enough for that KO. Of course, even if the Ogerpon makes past the turn, it will be slower, but even thaws at that point. Ursaluna won't even have the opportunity. That one's going to get KO'd while still cold, still frozen. Man, what a game. Now, it'll be whether the Lunala comes in, or there is still a fourth Pokemon that Brandon has here that we haven't seen, and yeah, it will be a Lunala instead. So this one definitely has some mileage to make up.
It does, but considering both of Ryan's Pokemon are at full HP and Lunala has used up its Power Herb, it's not going to get that special attack boost for the rest of the game. The +1 special defense from the Calm Mind and the Assault Vest are working very strongly against Brandon right now.
Switch out. Indeedee in Ogerpon is out. So Psychic Terrain in. So if there was this Grassy Glide coming out from this Rillaboom, this is going to be shutting that down completely. U-turn instead into the Indeedee. A lot of damage. Incineroar can come back out. And if it is something like that Expanding Forest, well then nothing to the Incineroar. And then you're contending with this +1 special defense Kyogre as well.
Another situation where Incineroar has become very safe into this Indeedee Lunala combination because Meteor Beam is off the table. Intimidate not doing a whole lot of work here, but that Dark typing is all it needs.
Expanding Force, so sure enough, Incineroar, that is one safe cat into the other slot. The Kyogre, well, barely a tickle at that point. Ice Beam has done the most mileage this game. At least it doesn't get the opportunity to freeze, but that's on the downfall of Lunala, just gets straight up KO'd.
I mean, freeze or knockout, both are pretty debilitating for a Pokemon, I would say. And a really tough spot for Brandon to be in here. Again, that Ogerpon is frozen. Even if it wasn't frozen, you got an Ogerpon and an Indeedee to deal with the Grass-type boosted Kyogre at a Rillaboom on top of the Incineroar that's already on the field. So a really tough spot to be in. And now that Ryan has Brandon kind of on the ropes, again, this is a situation where now Origin Pulse is a bad choice, right? The heal from the Water Absorb will be relevant, but will not happen as Brandon forfeits and lets Ryan lock his spot in day 2 at Vancouver.